So this is a webinar that I'm doing. I operate honey tree arborist services, and you're probably asking, well, why am I getting to talk about this topic, about trees for bees? Well, as Anna covered in the introduction, I'm an arborist. I'm a tree physician. I'm not a tree mortician. I like that phrase because I don't take trees down. What I do for a living is I try to keep trees alive. I diagnose tree disease. We try to figure out integrated pest management techniques. Uh, we we try to use products that are least impactful on pollinators, which is unique in the industry. And we have real good results, and we're real busy. I also teach pruning seminars, and we do a lot of work with trees. We try to remediate trees, keep them going. As she said, I got my first hive in 1966. You guys do the math. I'm old. Got up to 200 hives. I was a manager for Data Inn and Sons for 7 years, which is the largest bee supply branch it was at the time in the world. And I'm a co-sponsor of the Grand Rapids Bee Club. Also a nursery grower. So all that with my background. The reason that we got started on this is that the Michigan Beekeepers Association has introduced a program. We started it last year to distribute and plant some bare root honey producing trees throughout the state of Michigan. And we are trying to follow a model developed in the country of Slovenia. Now, Slovenia is a country you can see between Croatia and Austria next to Italy, but they have a real good program in place. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to copy and see where they've been successful. Their goal is to encourage the planting of honey trees and plants in cooperation with municipalities and cities in the region, in the country. Their goal is to increase bee forage resources in Slovenia by planting 2 million trees by 2030. That's a great goal. One of the things that they're doing is that they're asking beekeepers to gift new parents with a honey tree upon the birth of their child, so that as the child grows, the tree will grow, and they kind of grow together. And it's kind of a really cool thing to do. They have developed best practices on weed and brush control for their municipalities and their utility infrastructure. And the reason that that's important is because often when I go out on jobs, I'll see somebody mowing a field of milkweeds, for instance, just before they bloom. And all it takes is a little education, like let's wait till they're done, or let's wait till the monarchs have all hatched before we mow that field down. And they also began a day of planting honey plants. And this is celebrated all across the country. They have a lot of mayors involved. It's kind of like our Arbor Day. And they their trees are provided by the Slovenian Forest Service and non-governmental organizations. And they also give one free honey tree to each Slovenian beekeeper. We'd like to do that. We're not to that point yet, but we have thousands of beekeepers in Michigan. And wouldn't it be amazing if every beekeeper planted one tree that provided nectar and floral sources to bees every year? I think that after a short period of time, we would have thousands and thousands of trees planted in the state of Michigan that are beneficial, not only to honeybees, but to native bees and to butterflies. So we're about to talk about a very empowering act. Planting trees is powerful. We can influence the lives of people and wildlife for centuries with a successful planting. It's a quote from an author called Akiva Silver. Interesting book he has. But what he says is true. We can influence the future. We can influence not only our generation, but the next generation and the generation after that by planting trees and supporting wildlife and pollinators for centuries to come if we do it right. Or we can plant them in coffins and wait for them to die. The typical urban planted tree lives only 13 years. As a former city forester, I know this only too well. We put them in a coffin and we say, oh, okay, good luck. Trees also provide food and shelter to more than bees. It's a great photo in the upper left of monarch feeding on black locust. Don't forget that monarchs have to feed on their way up north too, and they feed on nectar. and they are especially drawn to black locusts when they're in bloom. Happens to coincide with their trip up north. Provides forage and habitat to insects and birds and many other forms of wildlife. So we're not just supporting our bees and pollinators, we're supporting the whole ecosystem. But first, I want to talk about, why do we need trees for bees? You know, I think this has been a topic that I'm passionate about, but most people have forgotten that trees are one of the largest sources of nectar and pollen for our pollinators that we have. We think about planting small bundles of flowers and we think we're doing good, and we are, but we do need to talk about the value of trees for bees. This is my money shot. I love this photo. This is a tulip poplar. It opened up just that day that I took this photo, and I'd been waiting to get this photo because tulip poplars put out so much nectar that it literally drips on these calyx, which are, they have a funnel on them to drip the nectar away from the flower. They produce so much nectar that I think a forest of these, you could not have enough bees to gather it all. So if you're a beekeeper, there are 3 things that will affect your success as a beekeeper. And if you're not a beekeeper, you need to know what the stressors are that are affecting your fellow beekeepers or your neighboring beekeepers. Number 1 is pests and diseases. Our biggest pest we have right now is a mite, and it's a horrible mite. Not only does it suck a lot of the juices out of the bees, but it's like a malaria mosquito. It is spreading diseases as it feeds on bees. It's spreading many, many different viruses. The second pest that, or problem that beekeepers face, is pesticides. Not only direct kill, as mainly homeowners spray their lawns to kill that clover or whatever, but pesticides are still a major problem for bees. But the third problem that we run into as beekeepers is forage and nutrition. We need the right food at the right time and in large quantities. You know, we can have a food out there like soybeans. We can have a lot of it, and the bees will gather a lot of nectar from soybeans, but it's not a complete food. It would be the same as you eating nothing but potatoes or nothing but eggs. So they need the right food in the right combinations, and they need it in large quantities. There are more than 2,000 species of plants in the Midwest that are visited by honeybees. That's a lot of flowers, and the bees will visit them all readily. The question is, which ones are valuable to the honeybees? This is a pollinator garden owned by one of my customers that I work for in Grand Haven, and it's a beautiful garden, and it is highly productive for our native bees and our butterflies. But look at this. It's gorgeous. It's providing habitat. It's providing continuous flower. It's well thought out. And I certainly have nothing bad to say about this. This is awesome. But could it support a hive of bees? I don't think so. It's about 1/4 acre. I was trying to do the math today in preparation for this talk, and I was thinking, and I may be wrong, that a colony of bees from spring until the next spring over the course of a year probably needs 250 pounds of honey. That would allow 60 pounds for the beekeeper, 90 pounds for wintering, and the rest just for metabolism, raising brood. And I could be off on that, but if it takes 2 million floral visits per pound, and we need 250 pounds of honey per colony, we're talking about 500 million flower visits per colony. I don't see it here. Maybe, but I don't see it here. This is useful. This is wonderful. This is awesome, but it's not going to make a colony survive. What will make a colony survive? A lot more flowers than that. These trees are highly productive meadows for honeybees. They are literally meadows in the sky. When you look at this photo, look at the photo on the right. How many flowers do you think are on this flowering crabapple compared to the number of flowers in this pollinator garden? I think that we're probably pretty close, maybe even more on that tree than are in that entire garden. And that entire garden is taking up 1/4 acre of land, and this tree is taking up a footprint of about 4 square feet. and you can plant flowers under it. You can put a meadow under this meadow. Trees are truly remarkable. They're highly productive meadows for honeybees. I like to let people know that the two most important plants for spring buildup, honeybees have to build up their populations in the spring, and they do that by going out and gathering nectar and pollen, and they use it to turn into baby bees, which become field bees, which go out and gather more nectar and pollen. And it's very, very important that a honeybee colony build up in the spring. The two most important plants for honeybee spring buildup are the maples, especially the red maples, and the willows, especially the pussy willow. We don't think about that. We think about the dandelions. We think about the scira. We think about those daffodils that we have in the garden. They're nice, but they're not significant. And actually, dandelions don't come out until about 6 weeks after the maples are in full bloom. The willows and maples provide, 58% of all the pollen that our colonies need in the spring. The interesting thing is, I've been told, I haven't done the analysis myself, I'm not capable, but I've been told that willow and maple pollen combined provide all the essential amino acids that bees need for reproduction. That's truly amazing. By the way, all of these trees are growing in wetlands. This is a photo of a maple in bloom. Did you ever know they were so pretty? Really amazing. This is a red maple tree in bloom. You may drive right by it and not even know it's in bloom, but indeed they do bloom, and they'll start blooming in March. A month from now, I expect to see red maples in bloom. I will certainly see silver maples in bloom, but it's the red maples that are the most productive. Pussy willow in bloom. Pussy willows come out just after the red maples do. They often coincide in their bloom, and they're extremely productive. It's interesting that pussy willows need insects for pollination. Maples don't. And I ponder this sometimes, and I say, well, then why is the maple producing so much nectar and pollen, and why is it attracting the bees? And I've decided, and I could be wrong, but I've decided it's because they're providing a natural antifreeze to the ovaries on the maple blossoms so that they don't freeze, because they bloom when it freezes at night. And that nectar is being taken by the bees, and to their benefit. Fruit trees are also extremely productive. Not only the fruit trees where we get apples and cherries, but also the ornamental fruit trees, such as flowering crab apples and ornamental cherries. This is a honeybee on a flowering crab apple. This is a native bee on a flowering crab apple. I've been told that native bees don't work them, which is absolutely bunk, but native bees are very significant pollinators of our fruit trees. This is one of the pollinator trees that we will be making available through the Michigan Beekeepers Association. This is a crab apple called Sargent. I chose this one because it's compact, it's cute, it doesn't get very large, it is absolutely disease resistant. If it gets eaten down by deer or run over by somebody with their car, it just sprouts back up. It doesn't care. It's extremely hardy, very adaptable to a wide variety of soils, and it's very attractive to honeybees. Honeybees love it. It's a cute little tree that can be planted up by the house. The ornamental cherries are also very productive for our bees, not only our honeybees, but our native bees, bumblebees. And here's often a surprise for people. I don't know if we want to call these trees, I will, purpose of the talk, but the sumacs are extremely productive in Michigan. We have 4 native species in Michigan, of which 3 are very important to our honeybees. By the way, poison sumac is not a sumac. Don't even go there. They're no more a sumac than a muskrat is a rat. They're just a lousy tree that have a bad name and give sumacs a bad name. This is staghorn sumac. Notice the bees working the flower. This would be in late May. And then there's another sumac that I really, really like, and it's called the flame sumac or the wing sumac. And this one is establishing itself naturally along the lakeshore. I've seen some large colonies as far north as Ludington. We have a large colony of these growing near Wayland, where I live, and they're an amazing, amazing sumac because they bloom in July. And the bees absolutely go berserk over these sumacs when they're in bloom. Look at the beautiful pollen on their legs. I don't know if you can see my cursor. It's orange, and the bees love this plant. And it comes at a good time when there aren't a lot of other productive plants out there in bloom. And then we come to the queen of our trees, which is the American basswood. According to Wikipedia, which is always to be trusted, it has a potential of 8 to 1,100 pounds of honey per acre. That's a lot of honey. Sweet clover, by the way, is about 200 pounds per acre. Close up of the flower. They bloom the last week of June, first week of July. They're found all through the state of Michigan, even into the UP. They're considered a good source of honey for comb honey because the honey is so clear and so beautiful, and the bees bring it in such quantities that they can put it away quickly. American basswood or American linden does not bloom every year. That's its biggest drawback. They're a mast tree. They're like an oak, where they will allocate the resources and they will bloom maybe 3 out of 5 years. And they tend to do it as a group. You'll find an entire forest of American basswoods that all bloom at the same time, and they all produce seed at the same time. And perhaps 30, 40 miles away, they're not in bloom. And the reason for that is pretty unique. And that's because they're trying to produce a lot of seeds at one time, so they don't all get eaten by predators like mice and squirrels. And if the mice and squirrels go and plant them to hide them somewhere, they won't remember them all. And if they just supplied a small, constant supply of seeds, they'd all get eaten and the plants won't reproduce. Very similar to oaks in that regard. So that's the American basswood. I always assume they'll be in bloom the 4th of July, and they smell wonderful. So we also brought over from Europe the little leaf linden, which is another tree that we are making available through the Michigan Beekeepers Association. The little leaf linden is not invasive. It's a cousin to the American linden or the American basswood. It has some unique features. It's a great street tree. It's a great tree to go plant out in front of your house. It blooms every single year. We will find that the blooms some year are like this. They're incredible. They're massive. This tree, also owned by one of my customers, has literally millions of blossoms on it. More some years than others, but they always bloom and they smell awesome. So the American basswood we're making available through the Michigan Beekeepers Association, and also the little leaf linden. Little leaf linden does not get as large as the American basswood. It's not as prolific, but it's still a really, really nice honey plant. Here's a fun fact. 2 mature basswood trees can produce as much nectar as an acre of sweet clover. And I always ask, which one will fit in your backyard? Plant a couple trees, please. And the clover. Another photo of that tulip poplar. This young man was helping me that day, and we could have literally scooped the nectar out of these flowers with spoons and eaten it. It was about the consistency of Caro syrup. It's interesting, if you look in the photo on the left, you'll see that there's white on that leaf. That's because they produce so much nectar even before the flower opens. There are nectaries at the base of the flower that the nectar will run out onto the leaves and it dries, leaving this sweet sugar on the leaves. The bees love these trees. You can see why. Maybe next year we'll make these available too. So the lesson from that is that the largest potential nectar and pollen yield per acre is from trees. That's your takeaway. That's what I want you to learn from this talk. More than anything else is that trees are so necessary for bees. Very, very important. And the Michigan Beekeepers Association, as Anna mentioned, will be holding their annual spring conference March 11th in East Lansing. And there will be some guy there talking on trees for bees. So if you want more information, go to michiganbees.org and get signed up for that. So let's talk about planting these trees. Let's say you get some from the Michigan Beekeepers Association. Trees are available from the Soil Conservation Service. They're available from many seedling nurseries. You can order them online. Seedlings are available. I would really like to see you support the MBA, the Michigan Beekeepers Association, and your local bee clubs, because we're doing this as a fundraiser so that we can pay for speakers, so we can support research through Michigan State, and we can keep our clubs going. So I really want to encourage you to buy some trees from the Michigan Beekeepers Association. So I have a block on my screen. I don't know if that's showing through on yours, but, and I'm sorry for the small print here, but when you receive your small bare root trees, bare root means the roots will be naked. They don't have any soil on them. Most vendors will provide you with a care sheet, including the Michigan Beekeepers Association. But here's what's important. When you get your naked little trees, they'll be 3 to 4 feet tall or 2 to 3 feet tall, whatever the size is that you get. They must not be allowed to dry out. The roots must never be allowed to be uncovered with soil or mulch or wet burlap or a sheet or something. You can temporarily soak them in a bucket of water. But if you let them dry out, you will cause death to the tips of those roots, and that death will continue up the roots. They are so sensitive to that. I can't overemphasize it enough. And this is where you will fail at first if you don't keep them moist. Please don't fail. Please keep them moist. Put them in with some peat moss, put them with some paper towels, but keep those roots moist, not drown. You can temporarily soak them in a bucket of water, but those roots will absorb oxygen out of that water. And if you leave them in there too long, they'll suffocate. So 6 hours in a bucket of water, replace the water, or dip them in water and then go put them under some burlap or in some soil somewhere. Now, if you receive your trees from wherever your source is and you can't plant them within a few days, they should be heeled in. And that's a term that means you dig a trench, do it in a shady spot. That's optional. You put the roots in that trench and you cover them with soil. You can keep your little trees in bundles. They'll come in bundles of 5 or 10 or 25 or 50. Just put the bundles in there. And often root growth will start immediately. But here's what's important. If the leaves begin to emerge, the young trees must be planted immediately or potted into pots. You've run out of time. You've got to do something with them. These little bare root trees. You can put them into pots or you can put them in the field, but do it. And you need to plant moist roots into moist but not wet soil. So we always dip our roots in a bucket of water and then we pot them up or we plant them in the field. We don't want to put them in wet, water-soaked soil because once again, they run out of oxygen and they'll die. We always examine the roots for major defects and remove those defects. No J roots, which is a root by its definition, looks like the letter J. Cut the bottom off and it looks like the letter I. And when we planted trees at the Christmas tree farm, we were always in a hurry. And, sometimes we would just circle those roots together in a wad and stuff them in the hole. And of course they die, but don't do that. Take the time to make sure that the roots are spread out and that they're not full of defects. All right, I'm going to sound like I'm on a mission here, but I am on a mission. Never plant trees deeper than they were growing in the nursery. In case you didn't get that, never plant trees deeper in the field than they were growing in the nursery. Well, what if I want to put them in a pot? Never plant trees deeper in a pot than they were growing in the nursery. What's the bottom line? Never plant deeper than they were growing in the nursery. You're planting trees, not telephone poles. You're crying out loud. I see this all the time. I get called. People will say, my trees are dying. And I go, yeah, well, they look like telephone poles. There's no root flare. That root flare is the transition area between the tree and the roots. That root flare that you see on that oak tree, that beautiful oak tree on the right, That's the way a tree should look. That's transition tissue. It has a oxygen exchange. It's a living part of the tree. And if you cover that with soil, you smother the tree. Very important. If you want to plant telephone poles, then plant telephone poles, but don't call them trees. If you run out of time, pot them up. Put those trees in a pot. I would recommend, if you're getting a few trees, then you go and buy some potting soil from one of the big box stores or Walmart or whatever. I would recommend that you get like Miracle-Gro without the wetting agent. Miracle-Gro potting soil without the wetting agent works very well. Wetting agent keeps them too wet. They're great for your petunias and things, but they're not good for trees. So you can pot up quite a few with a bag of Miracle-Gro potting soil or some other brand. I'm not endorsing them. I'm not a fan of their fertilizer, that's for sure, but their potting soil is pretty good. And then you can keep them, through the summer or whatever. You can stake them, prune them, make them look good, love them, hug them, talk to them, and keep them watered. And then once they get established in the pots, you can plant them anytime. A tree in a pot can be planted anytime. I try to get them planted within a year after they're in the pot. That prevents circling roots and issues with being root bound. But the gentleman on the right, we're planting some trees at a riparian buffer. There's a gigantic spring in back of us there, just so you know. And that gigantic spring, they were like dropping manure way too close to that spring. And this is at a dairy farm. So we put in these riparian buffers and planted them all to honey trees that provide nectar for pollinators, and very successful program. We've done this quite a few different times now. So I'm a professional arborist, and I get called all the time with what's wrong with my tree. It's what I do. I don't mind, but it doesn't take long before I see patterns that emerge. Certain things keep reoccurring. As you plant your small tree, there are factors to consider for the future. First of all, plant the right tree in the right place. Now, I know you all know that. You know not to plant an oak tree underneath the power lines. Don't plant an American basswood under the power lines. You get the same result. Power company's going to come by, they're going to cut the top out. They're going to make it look ugly. You're going to be mad, the tree's not going to be happy either. So plant the right tree in the right place. Remember, they grow, They don't stay small forever. This is not a case of the wrong tree in the wrong place. This is a case of the wrong sidewalk in the wrong place. I've been called on many of these projects, so-called projects, because somebody will decide, well, I'd really like to put a sidewalk along the street, and there are mature street trees there that were there back when the city was founded. This American beech, for instance, often I'd come to a situation like this, and the contractor would have just cut those roots with a chainsaw, removed the roots with a backhoe on that side, laid a sidewalk, and then 3 years later or so, the trees are dead or dying or in great distress. And I run into this all the time. And I don't know what the option would have been here. Probably, realistically, while the contractor was there, just take the tree out, because this doesn't work, folks. You can't put a sidewalk on top of those big roots like that. Something has to give, and in this case, it's the tree that will end up suffering. And then, of course, plant properly. Well, I need you to plant your trees properly. Trees need air. Don't plant them too deep. I run into this so many times, I just get frustrated by it. And it's not necessarily your fault. If you buy a tree from a nursery, if you buy it in a pot, let me tell you, as someone who's operated a commercial nursery, how this works. You start your tree from a cutting or from a seed in a little tiny plastic pot. It may be 4 inches across or 3 inches across, and the tree comes up and it's about a foot tall. And then you or your hired help drop it to the bottom of a pot, and you add more soil to it, right? Because now you're going to take it from that 4-inch pot up to a 2-gallon pot, let's say. And it gets dropped to the bottom of the pot, and suddenly you've got 2 inches of soil higher on that tree than it should be. A couple of years later, you put it into a 5-gallon pot and it gets pulled out of that first pot, gets dropped to the bottom, more soil's added, and now you're 6 inches too deep. That's at the production nursery. And then maybe the production nursery goes and puts it out in the field and augers a hole, drops it to the bottom and adds a couple more inches of soil to the top of that tree. You get it. And you don't know that it's planted too deep. So look down until you can find those buttress roots, and those buttress roots should be exposed. This is a case I got mildly involved in because this was a professional landscape job where they put in a retaining wall and the homeowner wanted the trees to stay. Well, that oak tree that you see there is now dead. 8 foot of fill around that oak tree. Wonder why it died. 8 foot. They should have taken that tree out before they put in that retaining wall. These are examples of trees planted by a professional, well-known, respected landscape company. I got called into this job because there were several hundred trees at a condominium project, and they were dying 1 year after planting. By the way, they had a 1-year warranty, and they all looked like telephone poles. So I started digging around them. There's a locust on the left. I dug down 7 inches, and what did I find? Well, there's still the original wrap around that tree connecting it to the wire basket, and they had just augered a hole, dropped it in, threw soil over it, and walked away. The white pine on the right, they did the same thing. They did that with every single tree. They just augered a hole, dropped it in, and didn't care where the depth was. And now they're all dying. This almost went to court, but they were able to settle and get the trees replaced. And we put them under a care program. And I'm happy to say that today they're all doing very well. You're going to see this photo a couple times. Another job I was called out to, professionally installed. And these red maples, about 7 inches, 6 or 7 inches of fill around them. And we see what's called a girdling root developing here. And we need to watch for and remove these girdling roots. Girdling roots are the result generally of being planted too deep, of having roots that are growing in a pot and are allowed to start to follow the round pot, and they continue that, or bark is up too high on the tree, or the soil is too wet, and the tree sends out these little tiny, they start out tiny, little tiny hair roots that are coming out of the trunk of the tree. This is one way they're formed. They come out of the trunk of the tree and they kind of follow the tree around, and the bottom of the roots, the original roots for the tree, die. And now these girdling roots have to support that tree. And the problem is that they are growing right alongside or at a tangent to the tree. And as that tree increases in size and the roots increase in size, they choke. And so all of our nutrient flow up to the tree is stopped, and that tree begins to get sick, it gets discolored, it gets diseased. And I'll be called to say, what disease does my tree have? Well, I can tell them, but that's just a symptom. The reason it has the disease is it's surrounded by girdling roots. Girdling roots are not good. A fellow on the left, they don't have his permission to show us pictures, so he's got a smiley face. Or a frown. He planted this tree too deep. And good example of what happens when you plant a tree too deep, the roots that were suffocated at the bottom simply died, and now they're rotting. And very little left to hold that tree. So we got a windstorm in July. Good sized tree. It had been in for 30 years. You know what it did? It just tipped over. All the leaves are on it. And I had some other pictures I'm not showing here, but you could see where the girdling roots had gone around that tree, had circled it, and had cut off the nutrient flow from the tree down to the roots. The roots had all died, and there we go. Tree on the lawn. You can see in this photo again of how the girdling roots develop and are choking out this tree. One other thing I run into a lot is weed control or a lack of weed control. Turf around a tree intercepts the nutrients in the water that the trees could use for themselves. Simply eliminating turf and weed growth around a tree will increase tree growth by 30%. They know that in orchards, they know that in tree farms. Get the weeds away from the tree. A lot of reasons for that. You can use Roundup, that's another talk, or City of Granville that I advise occasionally. They have their Boy Scouts will gather large pieces of cardboard, they cut them in circles, and they put those cardboard circles around the trees, and then they put mulch on top. Does a great job. It also keeps their DPW from hitting those trees with lawnmowers and weed whackers. This tree, as you can see, bad pruning, no pruning yet. I would suspect that more than 30% of it is taken away by the turf, by the weeds. And we see that a lot. So how do we get around that? You can do it with chemicals or you can do it with mulch. But if you mulch, do it properly. Again, here's that famous tree again. Look how high up on the tree that mulch was. The mulch is no different to that tree than soil. It will suffocate the tree. The tree will abandon its root system, grows a new root system into the mulch, and then that root system is very dependent upon how dry or how wet the mulch is. It's not supportive. It's choking the tree. Of course, I got called because the trees were sick. And the homeowner, I don't know how this one ended up, because the homeowner said, well, they were professionally planted and they're under warranty. So I don't know how that all ended. Probably not well for the trees. Mulch volcanoes. I see this all the time. I have been known to stop when I see landscapers every spring putting mulch around trees and going, hey guys, I've got a piece of literature from the Arborist Association. Would you mind taking a look at it? And most guys simply don't know that putting a volcano of mulch around a tree will cause problems for the tree. If you mulch, you want to mulch wide and not deep. A couple inches deep, out wide, not a volcano. Oh, I hate those when I see them, especially when they're like bright red. And people put these bright red piles of mulch around their trees and they think it looks good. If I'm offending any of you, I apologize, but please don't do that. This was at a park where I got called. It's like all of our dogwoods, all of these new trees are dying. And notice there's no weed control around the base of this tree. Their weed control is to use a weed whacker, nylon string. And you know what they do? They just rev it up, go around the tree. They're in a hurry. They got to be in a hurry. They've got a lot to do. And they tear the bark off. They interrupt the cambium. They interrupt the connective tissue between the roots and the top of the tree, and the tree dies. More subtly, I often see this where they don't hit it real hard, but they hit it hard enough to bruise that cambium, and the cambium dies. And then you can peel it off with a jackknife and see that, well, it's dead. But, if you don't know to do that, you're not really sure why the tree died. But this is the result of somebody with a string trimmer. Fertilizer, good example of why I don't like Miracle-Gro. You can spray too much Miracle-Gro on a tree. If you don't follow the directions, and nobody does, you can burn the foliage, and you don't want to do that. When we had a garden center at my place many years ago, I remember a lady bought a bunch of rose bushes, and she took them home and planted them. And 2 weeks later, she called because all of her roses died. So I went and looked at them, and you'd swear she had mulched those roses in triple 12 fertilizer. It was like de-icer that we see on the ice today. And she'd killed them. Fertilizers are salts. They remove the moisture from the tissue, and the trees will die of lack of water because you had too much fertilizer on them. In this case, the trees will recover, but not always. Deer, my arch nemesis. They're cute. Who doesn't stop to look at deer when there's a big clump of them on the side of the road? I don't mean dead. I mean on the side of the road. They're so cute, and they taste good. But look at what these little buggers can do. These are arborvitaes. Arborvitaes are white cedar. And when you see white cedar, well, deer like to hole up in cedar swamps up north. And this is why. It's because it's one of their favorite foods. Deer don't stop at just cedars. Deer will eat everything. Deer know no boundaries. Deer just walk along and they nibble on things, and they always win. I had planted a field of blue spruce at my nursery one time, and they were about, 2.5 feet tall, and we had 18 inches of snow on the ground, and the deer came by and ate every one of them down to the snow line. So I called the DNR and I said, "What can I do?" And he said, "Sir, you're mistaken. Deer don't eat blue spruce." I said, "Well, come on up and look." And there were about 5,000 trees that they had nibbled down to the snow line. So he came up and he said, "Well, I'll be darned. Deer do eat blue spruce." But nothing I could do about it. They just nibble everything. And that's a serious problem. If you plant trees, just assume that the deer are going to eat them. If you don't provide some kind of protection, and these tubes work really well when they're small, if you don't provide protection from the deer will eat them. I was at a meeting put on by Michigan State several years ago where one of the foresters talked about how we no longer have forests starting in Michigan because of our high deer populations. All that we have that's growing naturally are those trees that we don't want for logs. Deer don't seem to really care for like black cherry. They don't seem to care for some of the other varieties, some of the elms. But these aren't trees that we want to grow for forest trees. We want sugar maples, and we want good quality trees, and the deer eat them when they're young. Serious problem. So do you want to take a few minutes for questions here, or do you want to get right in with the pruning, Megan?
We have a bunch of questions, so maybe we could do a couple and then start into the pruning.
Yep, let's do that.
The
I'm watching
very
the
the very first one is, can you maybe give some recommendations on ones that deer do not devour? And if you don't have any, that's fine.
Yeah, I do. I came up with a list one time of trees that I found deer were less agreeable to chew on. But as I go out and plant some of those trees, I see that deer chew on them. Those would include the sumacs and the black locust, which I don't want anybody to shoot me. I like black locust. It's the only native tree now considered invasive. But uh, deer don't like them because they have those tiny little thorns on them, but they will still eat them. I haven't found any tree that's totally immune from deer damage, especially not one that's a nectar producing tree. They just come along and sample everything. They may not eat them to the ground, but they'll certainly keep them pruned for you. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer than that, but everything I've tried to plant doesn't seem to work. We just have too many deer.
Yeah, I think that's a very common response and common problem.
Yeah.
Um, Someone asks about the Vitex negundo, the common chase tree, and they said they
Yes.
were given seeds, but they weren't sure if they were appropriate for Michigan. Do you have
I
any thoughts on that?
I doubt if they will do well. I know you'll make them sprout. I've sprouted them. I was given some seeds a couple of years ago, and they sprout quite readily. Um, I've got them in pots right now, so I'll let you know how well they do. I overwinter them in a poly house, so I'm not sure, but they should do well. Um, I'd kind of keep them in a protected area, but that part of it is experimentation. Experiment; they may work for you. I spent a long time working on certain varieties of trees until I finally found some provenance that worked, which means local seed source that worked, and it works for me. So yeah, keep trying. Maybe you can make them work. Select those out that survive the winter.
Excellent. Our friend Kathleen Prue says, what are the best trees for a marshy area?
Oh, great question. The best trees for a marshy area are you ready for this? Red maples, pussy willows, buttonbush. Those are your big three. And then go into the other varieties of willows, such as black willow. There's a willow called crack willow that's amazing. You don't want to keep it too close to your house. I don't name these things, crack willow, but they will draw bees. They're amazing. So those are the big ones. There aren't many of the dogwoods that you'll see growing that are very good for honeybees, but those that I just mentioned are the big ones.
All right. And then there's a question. So you mentioned the circle of cardboard as a mulch.
Yes,
How big is that diameter of that cardboard circle?
2 to 3 feet, depending on the size of the tree that you're trying to protect, and then put a circle in the middle and cut a slot to it and slide it up around the tree and put some hardwood mulch on top of that to hold it in place. It works very, very well. And it looks good. And the Boy Scouts they love doing it.
Yeah, that's great to know. And then could you use landscape fabric as well for that?
Um, yes, putting landscape fabric underneath mulch though is counterproductive because weeds will grow despite what they say. Weeds will start in mulch and grow into that landscape fabric. And then you really don't have much of a solution to your problem. I have experimented with that for years, and landscape mulch just doesn't do a good job under mulch. It does great under rocks, but the mulch, hardwood mulch, holds moisture, begins to deteriorate down into soil, and you end up with a weed profile growing right on top of that landscape fabric, and the little tiny roots go down in the holes and secure very, very well. So it's hard to pull up. So the answer to that for mulch would be, for hardwood mulch would be no, I don't recommend it.
Excellent. And then the crabapple, the one that was cute, could you just confirm the cultivar name for the one
Yep,
that you were recommending?
that's a Sargent.
Sargent.
Yes, Malus sargentii. Wonderful little tree.
Yes, I think you gave me one and it is adorable.
Good.
Oh, here's a good question. Does tapping maple trees for maple syrup impact the amount of nectar that bees will get?
No, I don't believe it does at all.
And then we have two questions on basswoods. There's a question on how you can grow basswood from seed.
Yep. I remember when I first started to grow basswood from seed because I wanted it off my own farm. And basswoods are kind of unique. A lot of different ways, and I'll try to keep this real brief, but if you gather the basswood seed before Labor Day, pick it off the tree before it drops. I've had good success some years, just direct sowing it in the fall in a bed, but pick it off the trees. Don't even let it turn brown yet. Just seed it. The other option is to vernalize it, keep it in your refrigerator. It needs 90 days of cold temperature, and then go ahead and plant it in the spring. That's the common way. And some of those seeds will sprout that spring. Some are just going to sit there and they won't sprout until the following spring. And it's really frustrating because you've got to keep the mice and the voles and everything else away from them while they're doing that. And your success rate on basswood is about 15%. And that's all. You're not going to get better than 15% germination on basswoods. And I don't know why. You can try floating the seeds. You can, I've tried all these different games to increase my percentage of germination, and 15% is what you're going to get. And that's good. If you get 5%, consider yourself lucky.
Could you maybe go into a little more detail on vernalization and floating?
Floating is where you take the seeds. You'll do it with oaks or anything like that, and you put them in a bucket of water in the fall, and the seeds that float, throw them away. The ones that sink, plant them. That's not always true for every species. Sometimes it's the ones that sink that you want to plant, or the ones that float that you want to plant. So to find out, just cut them in half and see which ones are viable, which ones have that green embryo inside. But floating is a common technique for seeing which seeds are going to be viable or not. Often, as soon as the seed hits the ground, they get infected with a weevil. And that's not just oaks or hickory, that's also our basswoods. and our maples, a weevil will get in, a larva begins to grow, and it's like, and they have this really, really tight relationship, and they will eat out the inside of those seeds faster than you can imagine. So that's why I think picking them directly off the trees is more effective. And what was the other question about fertilizer?
No, there was another question. Oh, the vernalizing about
Oh,
putting them in the
fertilizing.
refrigerator. Like, do you have to like put it in soil or just do you want to explain that a little bit?
Fertilization is a process where you don't want your seeds to sprout before spring. So they require a certain number of hours or days of chilling. And in Michigan, most of them require about 90 days of chilling. And that's temperatures around freezing or below. So what we do is we can do it out in the field, or we can put them in a refrigerator mixed with a little bit of moist peat moss, put them into a bag and put them in the crisper drawer of your refrigerator. Come spring, you'll often see them beginning to sprout right in your refrigerator. Then you know it's time to plant them. But there are some really good books, and you can learn about that on YouTube's. I mean, there are whole sciences and books written about propagation. So I don't want to address that right now, but it's a lot of fun. It is truly a lot of fun.
Wonderful. All right, if you want to go into pruning, we'll work on a couple and hold some questions for the end too.
All right.
Or next time you want to break.
Okay. Well, I will go through the pruning then. And now that we've talked about why we need trees for bees, and we've talked about how to plant them, we're going to talk about, do I have to prune them? Do I have to do anything to them after I get them in the ground? Well, yeah, you need to prune them. Why? Well, you want to prune these trees, whether it's a honey tree or your landscape tree or any tree in your yard. You want to prune it to prevent future breakage and storm damage. We have an ice storm here today, and there are a lot of trees out there that would not have broken in half had they been properly pruned. I have some photos on that to come up. We can do it to restore a tree. We can prune like an old lilac. If you buy a farm and it's got 50-year-old lilacs on them and they don't ever bloom and they're 15 feet tall, whack them out. Cut out those big old stems that are in the middle of that clump, cut them down to the ground, and cut everything else down to about 3 feet. Walk away. You can do that once in a while, and that lilac will restore. And after 2 years, you'll have a beautiful clump of lilacs or forsythias or wisteria again that you didn't have before. So we can prune for restoration. We can prune to repair trees after damage from, ice storms or car damage. We prune for aesthetics to keep them pretty, or we prune for fruit production. But the basic thing that you need to remember is there are some priorities in pruning. Remember the D's. You want to prune out the damaged. You want to prune out the deformed and the defective. You want to prune out the disease, and you want to prune out the dead. And although this won't apply to small trees, you want to remove the dangerous. If you have a tree limb hanging over a house or over a picnic table, take it down. I teach pruning classes. Here I am, hands-on class, teaching how to prune some trees. And you want to train now for future results. I love this photo. I went up to a beekeeper's house, see the beehives in the back, and he happened to have these pear trees, and he was doing this old method of training his pear tree. Pear trees have really acute angles on their branches, and an acute angle, when it gets weight on it, it just tears off the tree. So he was pulling the branches down. I have them circled here with a piece of twine, pulling the branches down so that that angle was increased in relation to the trunk of the tree, so that now we're at 45 or 90 degrees, a much stronger branch angle. And this is often done in orchards. He's using twine, which is smart because it'll just deteriorate in the weather. He doesn't have to come back and cut it. I run into this a lot. This is what will affect you the most, and it's codominant tops. It's when two distinct stems are coming out of a tree. They're competing with each other. They're codominant. You don't have one that's the boss. And as they continue to fight each other for dominance in that tree, the bark that's growing between them becomes what's called included in that crotch. And that bark doesn't go away. The trees get bigger, the bark stays there, the trees go around it, and then that bark gets infested with bacteria that begin to break it down. This is an actual situation right here where we have a red maple with 2 codominant tops. And then we get an ice storm, and that's what happens. One of those just breaks off. It's just simply snaps off, because if you look at the top of this break, you can see where we had that included bark. The bark does not allow those 2 trees to graft together. It acts as a barrier, and you get fungus and bacteria growing inside there, and there's nothing to hold that tree together, and we get a little stress on it, it breaks in half. And then this tree is toast. It just has to come down. There's no way that that tree can recover successfully from being split in half like that. Let's talk a little bit about grafted trees. Grafted trees are beautiful. This is a combination of 3 different trees. The rootstock is the rootstock of a cherry or a quince, or maybe something else that they've decided to use. And then to that rootstock is grafted what's called a standard. A standard is what's holding the rest of the tree up. It's usually a cherry tree. It can be a pink cherry tree, and it's grafted to the rootstock. And then on top of that is grafted the white cherry that you have here called snow fountain. And that snow fountain cherry has no what's called apical dominance. It doesn't grow up, it just weeps down. Fun thing, if you're into horticulture, take some cuttings and root these cuttings off these. And you can be successful doing that. Because these don't have any apical dominance, you can put them in a garden and they grow flat across the lawn. They're beautiful when they're in bloom, or over rocks. They're gorgeous. But what we have here is we have 3 different trees that are all grafted together. And you know, the roots say, hey, I still want to live. I'm a tree. And the top of that tree, you know, it's not very strong. It doesn't have any apical dominance, but the stem of that tree is strong and powerful, and it's getting all the nutrients. And it says, I'm going to take over. So it will send up what's called a sucker from the side of that standard, and that is going to grow up above the top of the tree. Now, the people here were cutting it down, they recognize that. But if you drive down the road, you'll see a cherry tree, for instance, with pink on top and a white skirt below it, and you go, wow, that's really pretty. No, in a couple of years, the white's all dead because the top of that tree has taken over and it's reverted back to a pink. So in order to keep this, you have to prune out those suckers that are coming off the standard. So that's one thing that we do for pruning. Here are some very important concepts in pruning a tree. Despite what you've been told, despite what you think, plants do not heal. Plants seal. A plant can't heal, it can only seal. They cover or callus a wound. They compartmentalize a wound. That's a term we call compartmentalization. And wounds are a gateway for fungus and insects. Now, most plants have a protection response, that coated response, but stress will reduce that response. So if you prune it too hard, prune it too much, you stress the tree, and you do an improper pruning job on it, that tree will get disease. There's a good example. I don't remember where I took this photo, but this is a maple, and someone had just cut that tree branch off in mid-branch, and you see below it there are a couple more. They just cut off. They don't understand what's going on here. And what happens, this is an improper pruning cut. They're leaving what's called a stub. And fungus has grown on the end of this stub and is growing down the branch. And this would have been prevented had they cut it at a point of origin, or had completely removed it, because then the tree has provision for covering that wound and keeping fungus and insects from going on. But if you follow that branch farther down, you'll see fungus has now come down that entire branch and is in effect killing the tree, all because of a stub cut. There are consequences to these cuts. Some trees are more susceptible than others. But this is a good example of what happens with an improper cut. Should have been cut at the branch collar. This is never acceptable. This is absolutely forbidden for an arborist to do this. If you see somebody do this, I guarantee it's not an arborist. This is called topping a tree. There are a lot better ways to reduce the size of a tree than topping. If you do it year after year, it becomes a process called coppicing, in which that's how we develop broom handles and rake handles, but then it's a crop. But if you just go out and cut the top out of your tree like this, you are creating all kinds of issues. And the reason for that is that these suckers that come up, they're very weakly attached. The tree doesn't know how to respond to this. So every little latent bud that's under the bark begins to emerge. And you get this big witch's broom of stems that, and disease gets into those bad cuts. And these stems are so weakly attached because they're only attached to the cambium. You can grab right a hold of them and just tear them right off the tree. If you see a tree where this is happening, you try to climb the tree, it's dangerous because those branches can break right off, or in an ice storm or a snowstorm. Topping is never acceptable to a tree. Sometimes when you're properly pruning a tree, it looks like you're sleeping, like I am here. But I'm working on a Japanese maple, and sometimes you have to change your point of view. They're so dense that the best way to prune a Japanese maple is from the bottom. Lay on your back, look up. This tree I pruned at a condo, and you can see, look at the amount of material I took out, and you can hardly tell looking at the tree. The tree still has maintained its shape and its form. So when pruning these trees, you need proper tools. Don't buy the cheap little tools. Don't buy them with anvil ends. You want scissor cuts only, and they have to be sharp. They have to be clean. Sanitation. When you go into the bee yard, hopefully you would not use the same hive tool or the same gloves at your bees as you would at your neighbor's bees, because that's a great way to spread disease. Trees are the same way. We always, always, always sanitize our equipment when going from one tree to another, or from going from a diseased branch to another. We use alcohol, or we dip them in bleach water. Talk about tree paint and sealants? Don't. They just are not effective. They just don't work. We could talk more about that, but we're pushing time here. And we don't need to talk about a 3-cut system here. Always cut back to a lateral. Stubs provide food and cover for invading pathogens. A flush cut is where you cut too close to the tree, and the trees, again, can't seal. Just remember the rule when you're pruning a branch off another branch. As close as possible, as small as possible. This oak tree is giving you every direction. Can you see the branch collar here? As close as possible, as small as possible. Yep, you should be able to figure that out. If you cut closer than that to the tree, you're cutting off the tissue that will seal the wound. If you cut farther than that branch collar, then you're going to leave a conduit for disease to go into that oak tree. I see this all the time. People think that when they prune their spruce trees, they should leave steps. Don't do it. We're not cutting to the branch collar, and disease will get into that tree. Timing depends on the species. We're running out of time, so I'm going to hurry up here. Basically, light pruning can be done anytime except for oaks. Oaks, because of oak wilt, must never be pruned except in weather like today, unless it's an emergency with a potential threat to life or property or the health of the tree. When you're pruning an oak, the rule is saw in one hand and, yes, spray paint in the other. So you make a cut and you spray it immediately. You don't wait till you're done with the job. You spray it within seconds of making the cut, because that disease is transmitted by a beetle, and that beetle is drawn to the smell of oak sap, and it will be there within minutes of that first cut. So that's the only time you can use a paint sealer. Most plants, though, can be pruned during the dormant season. So I have used up my time. So thank you, and we'll take some questions now.
Mike, that was amazing. And I just want to remind everybody, we'll do questions, and if people have to leave, that's fine. This webinar is recorded. And then also, Mike will be with his vast amount of knowledge at the Michigan Beekeepers Association meeting in person, and you can talk to him and ask questions there as well. So there is a question, more questions on basswoods, which I'm going to preferential give because they're also the best. How old does a basswood tree have to be before it blooms?
I'm glad that question got asked, because the American basswood, if they're grown from seed, you won't get many blossoms on them until they're 12 or 15 years old. And that can't be hurried on. You can, if you do a graft or if you do a cutting, you can accelerate that time. But if it's from seed, it's going to be 10, 15 years old. But then, and here's what I will always tell people, but then for the next 125 to 150 years, you're providing nectar for your bees. So, yep, it's not a quick tree. The little leaf linden will bloom at a much earlier age. You'll have those blooming within, just a couple of years after planting. But they don't become very floriferous until, again, about 10. And that's just the way it is with these trees. Sergeant Crabapple, the third one that we're selling, those will bloom probably the first year that you get them. They just bloom right away. They're just happy little guys.
Perfect. And then, so how about trees that can handle being near the shore and can handle strong winds? So this is someone that's looking to make a buffer zone out of native trees.
Okay. I don't want to be a jerk here, but have them define native.
We'll assume Michigan. I don't know if this person is, and they can, Laura, if you want to add more in the Q&A, you can.
Yeah, native to the area, native since white man came, native since the glacier.
Let's say pre-European Michigan.
Pre-European Michigan, that's good as a honey plant, that's good along a shoreline.
I think, yeah.
Then you're looking at red maples, which are highly adaptable to all soil conditions. You are looking at, if you're along the shoreline, I don't know if there's shade, but striped maple would be an option. If you want shrubs, something that will sustain the winds, we don't have a lot. We just don't have a lot. I would probably your red maples are going to be your best bet. Oaks, of course, do really well. You'll see oaks doing, along the shoreline, we see 3 different trees. We see red maple, or 4. We see red maples, we see hemlocks, we see beech, and we see oaks. They all do very well in a shoreline community. None of them are good for our honeybees, but they are good for stabilizing and used as a windbreak. White pine there too are also not bad. We'll see those as native community trees.
And I just want to point out, for those of you not watching the chat, Anna just put in a document on windbreaks that both she and Mike Connor were involved in writing, of trees that work well in windbreaks. There's a few questions, Mike, on girdled roots. So
yes.
Can you remove them once they're found? And what do you do with trees that have girdled roots?
Yeah, each tree is an individual basis. If the tree has one in that tree, the girdling root has not yet embedded itself into the trunk of the tree, or it has embedded itself only slightly, then you can cut both ends of that girdling root and just remove it. And whenever I cut a girdling root, I always give it a spray of a systemic fungicide. You can use any kind of fungicide, but just make sure that that cut gets some fungicide on it. If the roots have embedded themselves into the trunk of the tree, there's probably nothing you can do. It's said on average, a tree needs 18 good conduits from the roots up to the trunk. And Alex Shigo says that in his book. They need 18 conduits. And if girdling roots have eliminated 12 areas where nutrients are getting up into the tree, then you're going to really struggle. Some trees will take the nutrients up from the roots, and it's extremely linear. So a root on the north side, for instance, is only feeding the branches on the north side. Some diffuse the nutrients around. Some of the oaks will diffuse the nutrients, not all. Some of the maples are extremely linear. Some of the white pine are linear. So if you've got a girdling root on one side, you'll see that affect that side of the tree, which is often my clue when I go look at a tree. They can be removed, and you're better off trying than you are leaving it, unless it's too big and the wound that you cause will cause damage to the tree from fungus and insects. So it's kind of a dance. It's part of an art. If they're small, get rid of them.
Okay, how do you have recommendations for urban cities, specifically Detroit, in areas that have lack of a tree canopy?
Yeah, there are entire lists, Global Relief, Green Michigan. They all have lists of trees that are adaptable to urban conditions, and I'm sure you're familiar with those. The issue that I always run into is the desire for native trees, because that sounds good. And the I like to provide trees that give us back something for pollinators and for wildlife. So I find myself sometimes at odds, because, for instance, we can look at a redbud and say, well, that's a nice native tree. Well, a redbud won't do well as an urban tree, generally. It may or may not. Most of our native trees now have a non-native pest, and it's a huge problem. So we're kind of at this threshold of saying, well, we don't know what to use because we don't have a lot left on our palette of trees that we consider quote unquote native. We can put in a basswood, but as a street tree, they'll get large, too big. If you stay in the same genera, then you use things like little leaf linden and silver linden. We can put in some oaks for providing food for the insects that feed the birds, but then eventually people will complain about the nuts on the sidewalks. Yeah, there are a lot of recommendations out there, and they're all subject to opinions and what will actually work. I plant a lot of tree lilacs because they're solid, they're dependable, they grow in a lot of conditions, and they're good for the bees, but they're not native. So you see the problem we run into. Flowering crab apples, not native. They're beautiful, provide food for our bees. So we have to decide what the parameters are for that municipality.
That's
I hope
great.
that answers. Yeah.
No, that's a great answer. And coming off of that, there's a few questions on whether or not these plants are good for bees. So maybe if I could read them to you and you can tell me if you feel that they're good for bees.
Sure.
Black gum trees,
Yes.
redbud and serviceberry.
Well, red buds are moderately good. They're excellent for our native bees. They're excellent for our bumblebees. Service berries are not good for our honeybees, but they are good for our smaller native bees.
There was one on high bush cranberry.
Yep, high bush cranberry. I have seen the bees work that very aggressively, both honeybees and native bees.
And then this black walnuts.
I used to always say that black walnuts offered nothing to bees, and then I read an article by someone recently who said that they actually produce pollen that is collected by the honeybee.
There you
So,
go.
yeah, at the municipality I worked at, though, we had black walnuts that were as city trees, and they had to be removed because they were a huge problem when they were dropping their walnuts on
Sure.
people's cars and sidewalks.
And then honey locust is the last one on this.
Honey locusts are basically a no-go for honeybees. They get the name because of the color of the wood. I have seen honeybees work them, but it's not their preference. They'll go almost anywhere else before they work a honey locust.
Oh,
They
one
have a
more.
beautiful blossom, but
I agree. And one time with Zachary Huang, we like ran outside to take a photo because we technically saw honeybee working a honey locust. So,
yeah,
um,
and, and if it's so rare that you have to run out to look at it, like they are on red buds or on June berries or service berries, then they can't be that good of a honey plant. That's my opinion.
yeah. And then what about choke cherries?
Chokecherries are wonderful for our native bees. I have never seen a honeybee on a chokecherry. I'm sure that they work them, but there will be a cloud of native bees around chokecherries. And I have observed them and observed them and observed them, and I've never seen a honeybee on one.
All right. I think there's still quite a few questions, but I think maybe Anna can maybe guide us in the chat of how long we can keep going. I could talk to you for about 17 hours.
All
Um,
right.
but
I'm just laying here, so.
well, there's a
Couple
few.
last questions.
Yeah, there's I think one really good one where people are just asking, there's a few people who are either taking down old trees and wanting to do some replacements, or they've got an old farm field and they want to put them in. If you want to just kind of re-emphasize your recommendations of what people should do, or what you would think would be the best for like old fields or replacing in pastures.
Well, it depends what their objective is. Are they looking for long-term lumber also? Are they looking for simply wildlife habitat? If they leave the field alone, we get old field succession, which will take over, and you're going to get all kinds of plants that are going to start growing by themselves, things that you don't like, but that are great for honeybees. And you kind of do this dance because I don't, I'm sorry, you're going to hate me, but I don't care if we get some autumn olive in there for a while and they provide cover for the maple trees and the tulip poplars and those other trees that we've planted that we want to grow large. And then they can be grubbed out or they can be removed. Sumacs will come into an open field like that. I mean, they'll come in all by themselves, but if you can get them started, they're a fantastic succession tree for old fields. The way this works is that the first trees that come in, the first shrubs that come in, they are all about reproduction. They want to take over that niche. They want to do it quickly. So they're going to sprout. They're going to bloom immediately. They're going to draw lots of bees by offering lots of nectar, lots of pollen. And that's good for us as beekeepers. And then they're going to produce lots of seeds that the birds are going to take and disperse. That's the autumn olive. That's the multiflora rose. That's some of the other invasives we have. And those trees that we want for forestry or for wildlife in the future, they're going to be a little harder to establish. And then we have to decide what our goals are for this field. Do we want to have patches of wildlife? Are we after more than the bees? Do we want pheasants? That's a joke. Do we want birds? Sergeant crabapples are great if they're just planted in a field, protected from deer for a few years and left alone, because they will grow for a long time. They're going to get to be 50 years old before they finally peter out. And the whole time they're producing nectar and pollen and food for our birds. So there needs to be more information as you try to develop a field, and that's trying to meet those goals. If you don't have goals, then you don't know what to shoot for.
That's good. I don't want to make you go out on being remembered for the person supporting autumn olive in Michigan.
I know, but I look at it out there when it's in bloom and I'm going, I'm not cutting you down till you're done blooming.
I mean, I know that my bees get fed early on that as well. I think that the last question I think is the best to end on is some people are asking how best to contact you with follow-up questions. I see your website, honeytreenursery.com. Is that the best way for people to contact you if they would like to either purchase trees or ask you more questions?
Yeah, if they'd like to ask me more questions, I'll go ahead and give you the email. I know that we talked about this, Anna and I did, but send me an email, which is honeytreenursery@yahoo.com. It's at Yahoo. Go ahead and send me an email, but put in the header. And you guys know that I'm bad at this. I'm a Luddite. I don't check my email every day. I'm too busy. I'm not bound to my computer. So if I don't answer you that day, don't be mad at me. But just say question on trees or something in the header so I can see it. And I'm real happy to answer, and I do answer. honeytreenursery@yahoo.com. Or, of course, I'd rather they utilize first the resources through Michigan State University. You know, if they have questions about trees or pruning or things like that, you guys have just a wealth of information too, and you can answer a lot of those questions.
Oh, yep. And Anna just put that. I was just setting that link, and Anna just put that in the chat. So the link that Anna put in, we are able to actually send that to different experts. So if we can't answer a question, it always goes to the person who's best to answer that question.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. That was fantastic. I learned a lot. I will never plant a tree too deeply again.
Did you walk away with that?
No, that was I walked away with a lot. I took very good notes, and I'm sure everyone else really learned a lot too. I really appreciate you as a resource in the state for sure. And I'm excited to see you at the upcoming beekeeping conference.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you.